part of Project 571, genetically engineered vampire created to destroy evil.
What do you want?
We need your help to kill a vampire.
Malleus Maleficario. It was written by a witch. The first witch. Titania.
That was a little snippet from The Witch's Hammer, the first film I ever solo directed, and it's just been remastered and re-released on Amazon. So if you like witches and vampires, then please do check it out. Anyway, let's get on with this week's episode. Just a warning for this week's episode. This week's episode contains discussions about suicide and the death of Kurt Cobain. Listener discretion is advised. If you or someone you know is struggling, please consider reaching out to mental health professionals or calling suicide prevention hotlines in your area. You're not alone. Have you ever wondered if you could write a book? Maybe a biography? Well, I spoke to Kelly Catlin, who did just that. Inspired by a family tragedy, she decided she wanted to write a book about Kurt Cobain, so she's written Kurt Cobain Forever in Bloom. First things first, tell me a little bit about yourself and what's led you to writing.
Sure. So, I used to be a teacher, but I left the industry after I became a mom. And, I still wanted to work. And I got actually into content writing and, like a lot of online blogging and whatnot. But I am a very creative person and I wanted to get more into creative writing. Something about Cobain's story just felt like a good segue. This was my first book. So I was kind of able to, take different creative elements that I'm interested in and music that I'm interested in, and put it together, and
Yeah. So that's before I get onto the book. That's interesting in that you've obviously got your teaching background. You've decided, right, I'm going to write a book, which is a daunting prospect.
Yeah.
Do you? How long did it take you to write the book? And did you have any concept of all right, I've got to spend this much doing this part of it, or were you sort of making it up as you were going along?
Made it up as I went along.
Nice.
I have a friend who's a book coach, and I would drive him crazy. I'd call him or I'd message him and be like, what do I do? What do I do? And he'd kind of, help guide me. But for me, the book reads, first person point of view. It's really my journey. So all I did was, as things happened while writing this book, my path, I guess, to learn about, Kurt Cobain, I wrote it down as it was happening. And then it's not like a diary entry or anything like that. I cleaned it up so it actually reads like a, cohesive story. But that was basically it. I was kind of asking myself a lot through the process, what would I want to read? What would keep me interested? I knew nothing about Cobain coming into the project. So I just kind of would stop myself and be like, okay, if I was somebody else reading this book who didn't know anything about him, what questions might I want to answer or address? So, because, you'll read these books sometimes, people will name drop and you're reading it I'm sorry, who? So yeah. I didn't want that in my book. I didn't want someone to be like, I don't know what you're talking about. So I made sure to be cohesive and I just kind of went on a wing and a prayer with the whole book. But it worked out. So
worked out. It's out. And last one because I'm just wrapping my head around this. I've always wanted to write a book and it's something I've toyed with. And the time to do it can be tough.
I'll help you if you want to. I'll help you if you want to.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah, I know you do writing classes, that kind of stuff. Was there any part of you, see, this is just the way my brain works, I would instantly be worried that every chapter I'd use the word, it's how some people use the same word over and over again, or they'd kind of, do you know what I mean? Stuff like that. Is that even a worry, or is someone else checking that for you?
It was. So I'm definitely a control freak, and I did have 2 editors on the book, but I'm also a freelance editor. So I was very meticulous with everything. Definitely a thesaurus was my best friend. So I find that if you go to family, they will probably be your most critical.
Yep.
And I love my mother, but I actually had her read it. And she was like, you use this word too much. And I appreciated that, though, because I kind of went through the book and I did Control F. And if I found that I used the same word over and over, I would change it. And for some reason, I kept using the word ethos. I don't know why. I used it repeatedly in the book, and I should have just called the book Kurt Cobain Ethos.
Ethos.
Yeah, so my mom kind of pointed that out and she was like, "Boy, you use that word a lot." So, no, I didn't want it to be like redundant or have people finish reading it and be like, "We know what SAT words you liked," you know. So,
Yeah. Yeah, no, that would be a worry of mine, and that brings me to the point I always say to people is that if you can allow people you trust to critique your work and take it with an open heart, that they're not trying to kind of tear you to pieces, the value in that is enormous, because you can sort of unlock all this knowledge that you do not want to wait until the film or book is out to find out. You want to know that ethos stuff. You want to know that
yes.
now, not when it comes out.
Yeah.
So Kurt Cobain, what inspired you to pick him as the topic for the book?
So first off, I never in a million years thought I would ever write a book. It just wasn't something on my radar. I never thought I had any like story that was particularly like interesting even. So back in 2017, this was a month after my wedding, we had a family member. His name was Walter. He was 33 years old. He was a veteran Marine. He did die by suicide. And it was, one of those things nobody saw it coming. I'll never forget that day, my husband calling me to tell me the news. And it's one of these things where, over the years, you find ways of existing with something like that, with a tragedy, you know what I mean? And I didn't want to just remember Walter from a depressed standpoint. I didn't want to remember, my last memory of him being that phone call from my husband, that, you know what I mean? I didn't want to think about him those ways. And it was actually during the pandemic. I was out with my son and we came home and my neighbor across the street was blasting Nirvana. And I've got like 20 years on my neighbor, and I'm like, "You guys still listen to this?" And he's like, "Yeah, absolutely, of course." So I go inside and I'm actually baking cookies with my son, and he goes and does his own thing, and I start listening to Nirvana, and it trips the Google algorithm, and I'm like scrolling through my news feed, and it's all this Kurt Cobain stuff, and I didn't know anything about him. And it was so doom and gloom. Everything was just painting him like this tragic face of grunge. And it pissed me off, I'm not going to lie. I remembered thinking in that moment, like, geez, if Walter had been famous, what a horrible way to be immortalized, basically. And I kind of started going down this rabbit hole. It's the pandemic, you can't really do much. And I went down this rabbit hole and I started learning about Cobain. And I didn't know that he was this vocal feminist. And I didn't know that he was really this gay rights advocate and he championed for equal rights. And I'm sitting here, and I'm reading and I'm learning about the benefit concerts that Nirvana played. And my mind is like, why is this not what pops up in the media? Why is everybody obsessed with this man's, like tragic ending? Why can't we look at his life like, wow, he paved the way for so many marginalized groups? And I, right then and there, I'm going to write a book about him and it's going to be different. And in my head, I'm like, nobody's going to care. You know what I mean? People cared. I mean, it's been almost 3 years now, and I have this 500-page book that's got some like really wild interviews in it. People who I told my story to, I told them about Walter, and they were like, "We're going to stand up with you. We're going to help you write this new book from this new perspective." I'm giving at least half my profits to charity. That got a lot more people to want to come out and help. So that's how I arrived at Kurt Cobain. He felt like such a prominent, suicide from the 20th century that it's like all we focus on. And you've got, especially as a mom, I look at it like you have all these impressionable young people that look up to him. What message are we sending that, he was just defined by his depression when he really wasn't? So that's the book. That's why I did it.
That's the book. Yeah, I mean, I've got to say, he was Nirvana was right at my teen years as well. So it's a big thing for me. And I don't know. I think obviously part of it is that kind of the cliche of the tortured artist kills themselves. Obviously, at the time, I remember all of the media surrounding it, and there was even the film, wasn't there? His last day.
Yeah.
And and I think maybe it tied in a little bit to the music. Kind of, some of it sounded a bit sad and it had this kind of sound to it.
Yeah.
So who were the sorts of people you managed to speak to in relation to the book?
So I wanted to make sure that I tackled like a real wide array of people. Like, some people have said like, "Oh, you have an eclectic group of people," but I thought Cobain was eclectic, and I thought that would kind of, So the book is in 5 different sections, and each section has specific interviews. Worked with Nirvana's, management at different parts of their, fame, celebrity status, if you will. I worked with Ryan Agner. He's phenomenal. He's regarded as their first manager, but he really wasn't their manager. He's kind of more of a friend helping out. But then also Danny Goldberg, who was their manager when Cobain passed away. I worked with, this is one of my favorite interviews and also one of my saddest interviews. But I worked with the recording engineer, Steve Albini, for Nirvana's In Utero. And we last spoke about a month before Steve passed away. So that was terrible. Actually, as a thank you to Steve for being part of this, his wife's Letters to Santa charity is one of the charities I'm supporting with my book.
Nice.
Yeah, I wanted to do that for him. But I wanted to work with also members from the, grunge scene. So I worked with Gary Lee Conner from the Trees, Kurt Danielson from Tad, who they toured with Nirvana more than any other band. Nirvana had a stage dancer, Tony the Interpretive Dancer. He's in my book. I wanted to talk to Kirk Canning, who he played the cello on Nevermind, Something in the Way. I talked to some of his friends. He was very good friends with this man, Carlos Cake Nunez, who's a writer. And Carlos kind of offered some insight into his friendship with Kurt, his time with Kurt. There were also other people. Kurt knew a lot of people. There are other people that he lived with or was friends with that haven't done interviews before. So I was very fortunate to speak to them. And then I had people find out about the book and reach out to me too. So this was really neat. But someone reached out to me and she actually wound up writing the foreword for my book. Yeah, she's amazing. Her name is Susan Collins, and she's the former VP of A&R for Virgin Music America. So that was Nirvana's music publisher. So definitely like an eclectic group of people.
Yes, there's lots of names in there. So then I'll step away from the book for a second, because I'm just thinking of the sort of person who might be like, right, I'm going to write a biography, or even somebody, maybe a documentary filmmaker who's going to have to interview a lot of people. Your interviews have there's always this underlying sensitive topic in there because of the suicide. What would be your tips for interviewing somebody and getting a good interview out of them, especially when it's around a sort of a sensitive topic?
My number one thing was, so because I didn't know much about Cobain going into this, I was able to learn about him as a human and not just that rock monolith. So I think that I kind of had going for me in the beginning too. Having, experienced a suicide with Walter, I was able to come in sensitive and remembering that the people I was speaking to didn't lose, Kurt Cobain, the lead singer of Nirvana. They lost Kurt Cobain, their friend. So the first thing that I felt like I needed to do was make sure that I was candid and upfront with everybody. I wasn't going to ask them, questions about someone they loved that they lost without opening up about my story. And that kind of, I think, paved the way for open and honest dialogue. I also wanted everybody to know that I don't want to say not a career writer. I didn't do this because I wanted to get known for being some author who writes about stuff. That just wasn't my intention. So I approached people and I was very honest. I was like, I'm not a journalist. I'm probably going to make a lot of mistakes along the way, but I offered everybody the opportunity to read their chapters when they were done and make any edits that they wanted. And I also found that made the interview kind of process a little bit more relaxed too, because people knew that if they said something they didn't like, it's okay, we can redo it, we can strike it from the record. I also collaborated with a lot of his friends. So while the book was being written, they had access to see it, on like a shared drive. And hey, this sounds right, this doesn't sound right. So I think presenting the book, coming in interviews as a project, as a collaborative effort, kind of eased the whole process for everybody. And they kind of knew that this wasn't like me trying to do something where I stood out for doing a good job, but this was us coming together to pay tribute to people that we love. And then also letting everybody know about the charities ahead of time and things like that, and kind of letting people weigh in. I always try to be very flexible with the interviews. So I did some at some really crazy times, like middle of the night interviews if people were in other time zones. It was about, just being flexible and being available for people.
Yeah, good tips there. No, they are, and that's the same with this podcast. Sometimes you have to do it at a time that's convenient for your guests, because obviously they're giving you their time to come and chat. So
100%.
it makes sense, and it sounds like another thing you had going for you is through that honesty. It's clear it's not an exploitative book that's just being dressed up to sell copies. So is there, what do you think, because I'm a little bit like you, I guess, is in that I love the music but didn't really know that much about him, and to be honest I watched the film Last Days, I think it's called, and I just got bored because I saw it. I actually we were at the Cannes Film Festival when it premiered, and I think the first 10 minutes is him making cereal in the kitchen, and I was just like, this tells me nothing about the person. I was like, what is this?
I couldn't do it.
Yeah, maybe I didn't get it. So
tried, I couldn't.
Yeah, couldn't get on with it. So from your from speaking to all these people, what are some of the things that really surprised you that you found out?
Sure. I understood that he was sensitive going into it. And I think it's hard to, wrap your brain around that level of success that he had, right? I mean, you think about it now, and I don't know numbers now, but I do know in 2006, Cobain was valued, according to Forbes, as the highest earning deceased celebrity. And I think valued at like $500 million or like something, like nuts. And it's really hard, I think, to wrap your head around that kind of fame. So the stories that I was hearing, it's hard to be like, oh my God, this person is just speaking to me about like this random incident with Kurt Cobain as if it was just like, just the guy across the street. And you're like, that's Kurt Cobain. It was just like hard to process. But I think some of the stories that I was really surprised by were like the behind the scenes stories, where people would kind of share maybe what he was like after like a particularly grueling show or something like that. Like one of his friends had told me, he's on stage, and I think he was crowd surfing or something, and he came backstage and there's only a couple people back there. So it's not, a story you're going to read about anywhere else, because it was kind of something his friend kept private. And he was saying how Kurt's looking. Sorry, my cat is out. I apologize.
That's all right.
I have a cat that's running around. But he's telling me a story about how Kurt comes from, the stage, and he's saying, look at me. They're pulling at my hair. I'm missing a shoe. They're grabbing at my wallet. They're grabbing at other areas they shouldn't be. I can't do this anymore. I can't do the things that I used to love before that level of celebrity status. I can't, crowd surf. And you're listening to this and you're like, holy, like to think that he was that level of famous that he couldn't do the things that he wanted to do anymore. It was just like little stories like that. I think that just really humanized him, and they're like the reminder that he was a person, but I think we overlook that a lot. There's another story. I love to share this story. It's so the first drummer for his first band, Greg Hokinson, very nice man. He actually endorsed my book, and then it passed away 2 days later, which was terrible. He was very nice. But yeah, he was Kurt's first drummer for the band Fecal Matter. And during one of Kurt's unhoused periods, he lived with Greg. And even though Greg passed away, Greg has a sister, Misty, who I'm very close with, and she lived with them too. And she spoke to me about, her time with Kurt and Kurt living with them. And she tells me the story about one night her brother's out and Kurt was home. Kurt was in the house, and her cat starts to bleed, and she goes and she gets Kurt, and she's like, I don't know what's going on. What's wrong with my cat? And he tells her, well, your cat's pregnant. She's going to have kittens. And he goes and he tells her to get a box and a box cutter and blankets, and he fashions this bed for the cat and helps her deliver the kittens, basically. And it's just this really sweet story. But it's Kurt Cobain. Somebody's telling you this story. He just seemed like this really, really kind and empathetic person who just loved animals and people. And it feels like a shame that I think more people don't understand that about.
Yeah. And it's funny, again, I was only into the music, but before I chatted to you, I was like, oh, let's have a little look. I'll look at some famous quotes he said. And if he said them, I was like, wow, they're really insightful, philosophical things that sort of go beyond the music.
Yeah.
So did the music, did you use the music at all? Or was it all based on the people you spoke to? Did the music play a part in it?
It did. And honestly, the music that played the biggest part, and I know sometimes it can be kind of polarizing. I don't know if, have you seen Montage of Heck, the official Kurt Cobain rock doc that's on
I
HBO?
don't think I have, no.
It's, I love it. And I know it kind of got some mixed reviews because it does kind of pander to the same, the depressed narrative. But I didn't take that away from the movie. I thought it was really interesting because I think it was between 1987 and early 1990s. Obviously, Cobain had these montage of heck home recordings, and it was basically these strange things he was doing. Maybe he was on the phone with somebody. Maybe he was making weird noises. Maybe he was playing Beatles covers and all this stuff. And what I thought was really interesting about Montage of Heck is you're watching the movie and it's Cobain narrating it. And I was curious. I was like, how did they do that? And they dubbed it with his home recordings. So yes, it is sad. Yes, it does kind of cast him in not the most flattering light because they do show him, under the influence. But to me, I thought it was kind of like a glimpse into this artistic brain, right? So the music from that movie though was really wild, and the music is actually done by this wonderful film composer. His name is Jeff Dana, and he's done music for HBO shows, really well-known movies. I mean, he's incredible. But the music, what he did was he took Nirvana's some of their songs and he just basically reimagined them, and they're beautiful and they're haunting. And I listened to his music almost on repeat when I was writing my book. And then Jeff is in my book. I interviewed him because one of the things that you see a lot on like the music forums, like Nirvana forums on Reddit and stuff, is like people will question, like, do you think Cobain was talented? I'm like, yeah, he was talented. But I thought to myself, who better to answer the question of if Cobain was talented than a renowned composer who redid Nirvana's music for the official Kurt Cobain rock doc? And Jeff just sits in and he explains why Cobain is talented. And, that the music from that movie was really I think my husband got sick of listening to it. It was on a loop.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Yeah, nice. I will check that out. That sounds
It's
right up
really
my
good.
street. Yeah,
It's
I
really
love
good.
that sort of thing. So then, talking about his suicide, because obviously that's a big kind of full stop to the story. What did you learn about suicide and mental health, and in relation to, did this help in relation to your relative? How did that all sort of fit together for you?
I think I started this because one, like I said, had Walter been famous, I wouldn't have wanted him to be remembered that way. But for me, I think I had a lot of unanswered questions about Walter. And I think somehow, somewhere in my brain, I thought maybe doing this and talking to, Cobain's friends might give me that kind of closure too. And we could kind of come together. And it was really an incredible experience and one I'm grateful for. It was sad. It was obviously very depressing because even though I think I interviewed there's other books that I've interviewed hundreds of people. I kept more intimate. I stuck to, I think, about 37 people in total. But, every story would start the same and it would be happy and positive and people recalling good times. And obviously the end ends with, Cobain's suicide and me talking about Walter's passing. So there was a little bit of that catharsis, I think, kind of discussing it. For me, the catharsis came after the book was out because it's selling and I'm going, oh, I can give money to these charities. And that's making me feel good because I know I'm doing things in Walter's honor. I know I'm doing things in Cobain's honor. That to me made the whole process worth it. But my takeaway from it, and in listening to all these stories about Cobain, everybody had these wonderful memories of him and these wonderful sentiments. And a lot of people, kind of said the same thing to me when I'll say, like, you see this in the tabloids that he was destined to join the 27 Club. And someone said to me, well, that's a BS attitude. And it is, because nobody is beyond repair or help. We know so much more about mental health these days. We know so much more about suicide awareness and prevention. And just from writing this and speaking to people, I wanted to keep that clear lens of like, what signs did we miss? What can we do better moving forward in the future? And then at the end of the book, I have this huge section, which is just mental health resources for anybody, in the States, and I have some in the UK too, for anybody who needs help. So that was it. It was a tough book to write. It was
Yeah,
tough.
yeah, it is a tough one, because I think, I've fortunately not been in a position being close to anyone who has gone through that. Like, I can imagine part of the thing that you might struggle with is to understand why, and that maybe that might have been at the beginning. You're like, well, maybe this will help me figure out why, because it's such a big thing to get your head around.
It is.
So thinking about him and the impact he had on music, and also some of the things he said, again, these kind of philosophical quotes, which are even pertinent today when you read them. You're like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. What do you think he'd have made of social media?
I don't think he'd be on it. I really don't. And I've actually discussed this with some people before. I don't think he'd be on it. Imagine, you're talking in a 1991 to 1994 lens, how sensitive he was, because we saw what print tabloids did to him. And I don't even want to see tabloids, because some were respected publications, but we did see that Vanity Fair article that came out that did lead to, him and Courtney temporarily losing custody of their infant child. I can't imagine what kind of public scrutiny he would have been under had he, had access to social media. And I read some of the different letters. I think he wrote it to Geffen after the whole thing with the Vanity Fair article. Like, he was furious, obviously, as a parent, having lost custody of his child, and that all came out in the letter. And I think to myself, I can't have imagined him, someone that sensitive, having been lambasted on social media. I think, he probably would have had a publicist that would have managed an account for him. I don't think he would have been the kind of person who would have fared well with social media or have wanted to bother with it at all.
Yeah. So. I think I might be turning into that sort of person.
Me too.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And then I was just going to ask you just a couple of questions to finish off. One was, if you could ask him anything, what do you think you would ask him if you could speak to him?
Probably philosophical questions. I don't know. He just had so many different thoughts on the world and so many viewpoints. I think, to me, one of the biggest things that I learned, and I wish I could ask him, be able to ask him this. We see the way he grew up, right? We knew he was, a child who came from a broken home during a time when it wasn't super common. We saw the way his parents' divorce affected him and kind of, influenced his music and really the person he grew to be. He was unhoused. He was, forced to eat stolen food like so many other people. He could have done anything with his platform. He could have been like, I don't care. I'm doing what I want. I'm going to jump around in skin tight leather and I'm going to go spend my money at the Mall of America. He could have done anything. And he was still incredibly humble and shopped at thrift stores and played these benefit shows. And I think I would just kind of like to know, like, why? And not like in a bad way, like not to ever question somebody's, values or their altruism or anything, but why? What was it about? Maybe was there, some specific thing from his childhood that isn't discussed in the books, that really affected him. And he knew, hey, if I ever hit it big or I ever get literally the world to be my stage, I'm going to do the right thing with my platform. That just to me is like incredible. I feel like, and this is why I can't stand social media, but you see a lot of these celebrities, and I'm not saying a lot of them don't do the right thing with their platforms, but some just do things that I can't wrap my brain around. And he just never struck me as that kind of person at all. And I just would like to know why. Like, why are you so awesome? Like, I know that sounds stupid, but he really was. You know what I mean? I think we need more people like that, just not afraid to push back, especially during a time and a place when it was much less, common than it is today. So maybe instead of asking him questions, I'd just be thanking him up and down.
Nice.
He's a pioneer. Yeah.
So I've got one more question for you, but before I ask you my final question, I'll just say that I'll put a link to where people can buy the book in the description so they can check it out and read it themselves. My last question was, what is your favourite Nirvana song and why is it your favourite?
So I really like Sappy, and it's not that I don't like it, the more, commercialized version of it, but I like the version from the montage of Heck Home recordings where it's just him and a guitar. And the reason I like it is because there's this ambiguity to the lyrics, and he's basically, talking about essentially a bug in a jar in a laundry room. But I didn't glean that from it. I think that there's so much more depth to that song. I think it might possibly be about someone who's sustaining some sort of abuse in a relationship, maybe someone who's, oppressed by society, and the way we're just kind of reduced. So this is it. You're a bug, you're in a jar, you're stuffed in a laundry room. And to me, I don't know, I listened to that and I think he wrote it in 87, so he was 20 years old. You know what I mean? Just like the depth at such a young age, so intuitive and so socially conscious at such a young age. I don't know, I just love that song.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you are interested in being an author, maybe you want to write a fiction book, then do check out my episode with Bev Sanford. She's a published author, she's written a bunch of books, she's even written some Doctor Who ones, so please do check it out.